It's a whole year since the Zygon Invasion first aired. Watch on to find out why I love it so much. Hello everyone and welcome back to Defending Series 9. This week I'm looking at the Zygon Invasion, so without further ado, here's what I thought of part 1 of the Zygon's first two-parter. I thought the Once Upon a Time sequence at the start worked very well, both as a way to explain or remind casual viewers of the Zygon's backstory and the peace treaty on Earth from the day of the Doctor, but also as a bit of fan service to remind the fans of the 50th anniversary special and hark back to that, which was quite nice, I think. It was obviously about 2 years ago, I think, when this episode was on, so I do think it was necessary to have at the start for both of those reasons. The two Osgood sequence is a hugely intriguing introduction to the story, and sets the nightmare scenario up well, because obviously we're given the flashbacks first, and then the Osgoods explain the nightmare scenario, and then we actually see the nightmare scenario take place, so I thought the way the pre-titles progressed like that was very clever. Osgood's actual capture is terrifically tense, and the moment the Zygon spots her when she's hiding underneath the desk in that office building really does make you jump. It's very tense, you know, is he going to find her or not? And then the moment he spots her and just pulls her out, it's really quite scary, I think. Now for my weekly titles check, I think they're in sync again, but as with previous weeks, I'm not entirely sure, so please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, because as you know, I'm not an expert. Now, the two Zygon leaders are portrayed and disguised as children. I'm not really sure what to make of this. On the one hand, it's a bit ridiculous, and it kind of seems less serious when the Doctor is talking to them and warning them of the dangers of the Zygon rebels. But on the other hand, when they're taken away in the van by the rebel Zygons, it's actually quite a striking image, you know, two men taking away two little girls into a van. And that definitely makes the good Zygons seem more innocent, I think. But I don't know, I think on the whole, I would have preferred for them to be a little bit more mature, a little bit older, just to make the whole thing a little bit more convincing. Now, Unit Safe House. I was thinking about this because at first, on first watch, I didn't really understand why they were based in this seemingly very old and decrepit building. I mean, yeah, I suppose it's a cover-up to hide the fact that there is a unit based there in the first place. But what on earth is wrong with the Tower of London, which was established as the main unit base in the Power of Three, and has been seen since in the Day of the Doctor, and the unit audios as well from Big Finish? Yeah, it's a funny one. I suppose actually looking back, now that I have seen the Zygon Invasion, because I've seen both of these before recording this review, the Tower of London and the Black Archive, which is underneath the Tower of London, I suppose that actually was saved for the climax of the two-parter, because that's where the Osgood boxes are hidden. But surely units would be based in their main base, and the two Osgood boxes would be based somewhere else, more secretive, because any enemy of units would probably guess that the Osgood boxes were contained in the Black Archive. So that is a bit of a funny one. Maybe they should have switched the unit bases around so that the majority of the story was based in the Tower of London. But looking back, actually, I can kind of see why they didn't do it that way. It's just slightly odd. The Zygons forcing Osgood to address the humans in their propaganda video is played out excellently. Obviously, this echoes similar videos released in the past few years by terrorist groups, and it's anything but subtle in how it imitates them, and I think that's very striking, and it's important that the show kind of goes into so much detail. I mean, at this stage we're just scratching on the surface, but still to have that imagery in there really reinforces the main themes and ideas that are going to be introduced and explored in this two-parter. The variation of Clara's theme when we first see her is very funky, and it is a shame we never heard that again, really. Now, on the subject of Clara, I was reading the interview in the latest DWM the other day, the interview with the directors from Series 9, and it brought to my attention how much of the tone of this two-parter is influenced by the choices in direction, particularly by using handheld cameras much more than usual. For example, as noted in that interview, which you may have read, I don't really know how many of my subscribers read it, but as noted in that interview, the camera drifting off at an angle as Clara enters the block of flats and approaches the door is really excellently done, and it gives a very subtle feel of unease. It's not something you notice consciously, but I think subconsciously it really adds to the effect, and does make you feel a bit uneasy and creates this very unnerving feel. The scene where Clara explores Sandeep's flat is extremely creepy and very, very disturbing, because at first it kind of leads us to believe that the little boy is a victim of some form of abuse, maybe child abuse, but obviously his parents just turn out to be Zygons. But that's an interesting parallel actually, because you kind of think it's the other way around. You think the parents are humans and they have these evil motives, which is interesting because that kind of shows how neither humans or Zygons are 100% innocent. You know, that there are bad members of each species, and that's kind of being set up here very early on. I mean, obviously it's explored in much more detail in the Doctor's War speech, but it's interesting how that's set up here and introduced. Now, I kick myself every single time I rewatch this story and I see Clara leaving her flat, because obviously I now realise that her tying her hair back as she walks on the corridor signifies her replacement by Bonnie the Zygon. It's really superbly done, and on first viewing I seriously did not see it coming at all. Like I was saying about the camera angle thing, it's not something you consciously notice, but then it's there in your subconscious, and looking back, when it's revealed that Clara has been replaced by Bonnie, it all comes together and it's very obvious. And it's nice that these little subtle hints are placed early on in the episode to make the reveal even more rewarding and satisfying. So how exactly did the Doctor's presidential aircraft, as he calls it, survive being blown up in the Series 8 finale? It wouldn't have been so bad if they just said it was a different one, because clearly it's not the same one. Unless, of course, there's a built-in hostile action dispersal system, or displacement system. But yeah, it's a bit annoying how that's not built into the dialogue, just to explain A, if it's the same plane somehow brought back together, or displaced somewhere else in time and space, which seems a bit more unlikely, but you never know, or just a new plane. Although I suppose from the Doctor's point of view and the audience's point of view, it doesn't really matter. It just kind of niggles me a little bit. The reference to Harry Sullivan with his Zygon unravelling gas really is very lovely, and you do believe that he did spend his time after leaving the TARDIS in Terror of the Zygons actually developing this gas and this formula. It's a totally believable backstory that's very subtly just placed in there for fans to pick up on, and of course in the context of this story as well, it works just as well for casual viewers that have no clue who Harry Sullivan is, because he's not named on screen, at least in this part. Now I must confess, I always thought it was Jack, the unit woman, that was the Zygon on first viewing. Looking back, Bonnie Clara is very cocky and feisty and reckless, but I think what made her so believable, and this is unique to Clara, it couldn't really have been done with any other companion, but it's because we'd come to expect Clara to be so reckless from what we'd seen so far in Series 9 and Series 8, as her addiction with the Doctor and travelling the TARDIS had progressed and developed. So by this point, we expect Clara to be a little bit reckless, a little bit rude, kind of, when she's going on to Jack about the middle-age thing. We kind of brush that under the carpet and think, oh yeah, that's just normal Clara Oswald these days. But obviously it's not, it's Bonnie. And looking back, in hindsight, she does kind of cross the line a little bit more than the normal Clara would do. It is noticeable when you look back how the dialogue is slightly different and slightly unrealistic for Clara. But it does really work. There's very little difference between Bonnie and what we'd come to expect of Clara, even though we hadn't seen her in this scene, in this exact situation. It's what we're led to believe she would be like in that situation. I'd just like to say that the soundtrack in this story is absolutely fantastic. There are some very awesome new cues, as well as some particularly nice reused ones from the Day of the Doctor that crop up, nicely linking these two Zygon stories together, as the Peace Treaty also does. It's just a nice subtle touch on Murray Gold's part, but one that I really appreciate. The Zygons' new ability to disguise themselves as family members from their victims' memories and minds is genius, and completely evil. It works very well for this story, and adds to the overall theme of appearance versus personality, and things not being what they seem. And Colonel Walsh's phrase, "it's not paranoia when it's real," outlines the whole situation brilliantly in that village. Obviously the village that is used is familiar to fans as the one used in the Time of the Doctor for Trenzalore, but I think it just about works to reuse it here, because it's not nighttime, for one thing, and it's not completely covered in snow and explosions. There are also a couple of other reused locations which are nice for fans to pick up on. Ones that come to mind for me are the tunnel, which was also used in Flatline most recently, but has been used in other stories as well, and the shopping centre in the Zygon Invasion, which has been used in stories such as The Sound of Drums, Flatline Again, and the Sarah Jane Adventures story The Temptation of Sarah Jane Smith, where the grass boy is running into that place and they find the portal thing. So back to the Zygon's new ability. The scene where they trick the soldiers is one of the best of the whole story, and the whole series, to be honest. It's a terribly dark and moving scene, especially enhanced by the music in the background, which is quite repetitive, but quite simple and basic, and it works very well. A lot of people have actually said that it's completely unrealistic for soldiers of such a high standard, that they're in the army or in unit, to follow the Zygons inside the building. But I beg to differ. I mean, if you were in that situation, would you actually be able to shoot a Zygon or an alien creature that looked just like one of your family members or loved ones? I seriously don't think that I could, or anybody else for that matter, really. It's easy to say, but if you just imagine being in that situation, it would be hell, you know. To put it bluntly, it would not be a nice situation to be put in. And that personal connection, I think, makes the whole scene a lot more moving and relevant to the audience. I'll quickly just mention Kate as well, who's sent off to Truth and Consequences, the town in Mexico or New Mexico, somewhere like that. But anyway, it's a really good move to separate her and send her out alone, because it shows her off as a strong character, an independent character capable of defending herself without the Doctor around, which, if you like that, is something you get a lot more of in the Unit's audio series from Big Finish. But this is the first time really we'd seen it on TV, and I just think it's such a brilliant move for the character, because in all of her other stories, she's had the Doctor around or Clara around, and she's not really had that much of an opportunity to shine. I mean, take her previous appearance in The Magician's Apprentice. Yes, it was only a cameo, but she was just so badly used in that cameo. It's one of the few things that I just hate about that story, because Clara's there basically telling her what to do and commanding her troops, and that's not the way that Kate should be used, and Clara should be used for that matter. So it's just great to see her out and about, doing her own thing. A big thumbs up from me. The Doctor eventually finds Osgood, as we all know, but Osgood says the Zygons are travelling back to the UK, as they speak, via the tunnels. Could they really run or walk that far so quickly? I think not. Again, it's one of those little things that you notice in the dialogue when you're rewatching these stories and you think, what? Yeah, it's a funny one, but I'm not going to concentrate on it too much because it doesn't really matter. It's just me being a bit fussy and difficult. On the other hand, one of Osgood's best lines is, makes one wonder what the question is in response to the Doctor's question mark underpants. It's a fantastic line. Really subtle, but very amusing, and I'll say no more about it. But yeah, it's really interesting to see the Doctor so keen to know which Osgood has survived. And I was thinking about this. And to be honest, presenting him in this way makes him appear a little bit hypocritical in comparison to his war speech in the second part. Because it's as if he's not completely accepted her as a person. He has to know which one she is, and regardless of her personality, he just has to know whether she is human or Zygon. So yeah, looking at it in that way sort of annoys me really, but it does show that, like Kate and Bonnie with their Osgood boxers in the next story, that the Doctor is in no way perfect. He's a very flawed character overall, as shown in many stories in the whole series. We've got 53 years worth of stories. You know, the Doctor can't be 100% good in every single one of them. Another line from the Doctor, like a hybrid, seems a little forced in the context of the story arc, but it just about works for me in the context of this two-parter. But it is a funny one because it's a metaphorical hybrid, not a physical one. It's the humans and Zygons together, not as one physical being, but as one spiritual being, if you like, as one kind of partnership and alliance. Yeah, I'm not sure how much I like that. It sort of works, but as I say, I can just about brush that under the carpet. It doesn't annoy me too much. So we're now getting to the cliffhanger, the climax of the story. Jack's realisation, and the audience's, that Clara is in fact a Zygon, and that the Zygon pods contain the originals, not the duplicates, is such an epic and well played out moment, because the audience gradually discovers the truth bit by bit with Jack. And obviously, I suppose in this scene, she's the point of identification for the audience, because Clara is not Clara, she's an evil Zygon. So it's great that we work out what's going on gradually along with Jack, and that in turn makes her death even more heartbreaking, even though we don't see it on screen. In a similar way, the revelation that the foreign police officer is in fact a Zygon adds another layer to the story and really makes you wonder how Kate will survive, if indeed she has survived. The ambiguity is played out really well, in a way that kind of makes fans think, oh, maybe she has actually survived, but makes the casual viewer just think, oh, she's gone, that's the end of that. But obviously as fans, we know the writer's better than that, and if they were to kill off Kate Stewart, I for one would get quite angry, because I have grown quite fond of her and Osgood over the past, 4 years now? Crikey. The final realisation, the doctors, that the Clara he is talking to is a Zygon, is again a fantastic moment. The addition of the missile being fired at the plane really is the icing on the cake here. And overall, this cliffhanger seriously leaves you wondering how any of the characters in any of the locations are actually going to survive and get out of this massive mess. And it really makes it appear as though the Zygons have won. So I thought in hindsight that was a great way to close the story. A very good cliffhanger. And as I say, the threat levels are higher than ever. You really do wonder how any characters are going to survive, if they do. So overall, I thought the Zygon Invasion was a very strong story. It's definitely my favourite half of this two-parter, although I will go on to talk about that more next week. But on the whole, I have very few problems with this story. The characters are written very well, very strong characters, great use of location and setting, spreading the story out all over the world to give you that feeling of a really massive global scale. And the Zygons are better than ever, with new concepts being explored and added all the time, to really explore and go into depth about these 40-year-old aliens. So I think out of 10 I'd probably give it a 9. Like I say, I have very few problems, and there's a lot to like in this story. So just before I end the review, there's a quick chance, as usual, to look at some of your comments. My first one today is from Mondasian Monster, who, as you can probably tell, didn't really like this story very much. He notes how it dragged, it was boring, the 12th Doctor was silly, the Zygons zapping their victims, and the cliffhanger being obvious, 0 out of 10. Well, sorry, but actually I completely disagree with you there. In my opinion at least, all the elements that you mentioned are actually spot on. I mean, I don't think it dragged or was boring. The 12th Doctor was a little bit silly, but I liked that and it works for the development of his character throughout Series 9 as this kind of more rocker Doctor, in inverted commas. And the cliffhanger, well yeah, I kind of did see it coming a little bit, but it's still interesting to think about how the Doctor's going to get out of that situation, and because of that, I think it works. Jack Colgan says, felt more like a build-up to part 2 rather than an individual story, but it had some good moments, and definitely more of a Zygon story than the day the Doctor was, no matter what Twitter polls say. Ha, that's a cheeky reference there to a thing the official Doctor Who count did earlier in the year for Monster Month. I can't remember which month it was, but they asked fans which Zygon story was the best, and the day the Doctor came out first. And that really annoyed a lot of people, because it's not really a Zygon story, as you say, and this is so much more of a Zygon story. Yes, it is kind of building up to part 2. I think I'd say it's exploring the themes and ideas that kind of crop up in the Doctor's war speech in part 2. It's giving us a chance to see what the humans are like, what the Zygons are like, and then in part 2 it all comes to a head with the Doctor's war speech. Sam74940 says, I quite liked the Zygon Invasion as a two-parter. The second was definitely the best with the Doctor's war speech, and I'm glad they took the story further from the day of the Doctor. Again, I agree with you there. It was nice how the foundations for this story were subtly kind of placed in the day of the Doctor, allowing the writers to form this two-parter in Series 9. And also, this two-parter does make the Zygon bits of the day of the Doctor a bit more relevant, I think. And to finish, Isaac Whitaker-Dakin says, my favourite story of Series 9, as I feel it's great social commentary, and it was interesting to see the Zygons have members of their race who are both good and bad. It makes them different monsters from, say, the Daleks. Plus, it's great to see Unit, Kate and Osgood again. I completely agree with you there, although I wouldn't say this is my top story of the series, but it's still a very good one. As you say, it's great to have the Zygons on the peace treaty with the humans, and explore how they're good and bad members of each species, and having Unit back was always going to be a good move. I've already mentioned in this review how much I like Osgood and Kate, but yeah, it was great to see them again. They're really fantastic characters, and they got to develop a lot more in this two-parter. So thank you very much for watching this Defending Series 9 review. Please comment your thoughts on the Zygon Invasion below, and also let me know your thoughts on Part 2, the Zygon Inversion. You can either comment them below for me to include next week, or tweet them to me at StetsonDoctor. So again, thank you so much for watching, I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week for another review. Bye for now.